Hi, I'm Bill O'Reilly. Thanks for watching us tonight. More crazy violence generated by fanatical Muslims and an insane Christian. That is the subject of this evening's Talking Points memo. About 2 weeks ago, a so-called pastor named Terry Jones burned the Koran in Gainesville, Florida. Fox News and most other media ignored it. But then the incredibly inept Hamid Karzai, president of Afghanistan, gave a speech saying that Jones should be arrested. That was all the nutty mullahs needed to whip up fringe elements in Afghanistan. They took to the streets, murdering perhaps as many as 38 innocent people. Reports are they even beheaded a few of them. Of course, these people had nothing to do with the Koran burning. That took place in Florida. But the fanatical Muslims in Afghanistan couldn't care less. They wanted to kill, so they killed. Everyone involved in this story is disgusting. This Terry Jones idiot has blood on his hands. He had to know fanatical Muslims would go crazy. Karzai, simply a villain. Why on earth are we supporting this guy? And once again, the Muslim problem in the world is illustrated for all to see. Reaction to the situation is interesting. General David Petraeus is the commander in Afghanistan.
We condemn the action of an individual in the United States who burned a holy Koran. That action was hateful, it was intolerant, and it was extremely disrespectful.
Senator Lindsey Graham also weighed in.
I wish we could find some way to hold people accountable. Free speech is a great idea, but we're in a war. During World War II, you had limits on what you could say if it would inspire the enemy.
And then there's the media. Listen to this exchange.
If you're Muslim, the Quran is directly the word of God, not written by man. It's transcribed. It's directly the word of God. That makes it sacred in a way that it's hard to understand if you're not Muslim. So the act of burning a Quran is much more, potentially much more inflammatory than if you were to burn a Bible.
Yeah. Directly attacking God.
That's ridiculous. The Bible is a holy book considered to be the Word of God by Christians and Jews. But Christians and Jews don't slaughter innocent people when the Bible is burned, do they? But it is Karzai, whom I hold most responsible. A book burner in Florida is a loon. But Karzai holds a position of responsibility. He had to know he was whipping up dangerous feelings when he addressed the issue. And for what reason? Politics? There's blood on your hands, Karzai. Finally, Talking Points remains very dubious about the entire Afghan culture. For 10 years, the USA has tried to improve things in that country, yet it is still barbaric in many ways. So the question is, how much longer can we continue to try to save the Afghan people from themselves? And that's the memo. Now for the top story at night reaction. Join us from Washington, Dr. Michael O'Hanlon, an analyst at the Brookings Institution, and Dr. Michael Scheuer, former CIA guy and author of the new book, Osama bin Laden. Dr. Scheuer, are we at a point now where it's just not worth staying in Afghanistan anymore?
Way past the point, Bill. We've lost the war. The Afghan people don't want us there. We're just in a bad position. Mr. Karzai's family is kept in power so it can run drugs, apparently. But most severely and most problematic of all, young Marines and soldiers are dying so Mrs. Mohammed can vote in a rigged parliament. It is an absurd and obscene waste of young Americans.
But what happens, though, because, you know, the United States presence and the presence of the British and some other nations have tamped down the violence. It made it impossible for the Taliban to operate, so they can't torture people and all of that, you know, at will. What happens if we do pull out of there? I mean, they reconstitute the Taliban government. The al-Qaeda people come back in. They do what they did before 9/11 there. And all of the people that have died, their lives have been wasted.
Well, I think that question, Bill, should be directed at Mr. Bush and Mr. Obama, who have decided not to win the war because they want to win hearts and minds instead of killing America's enemy.
Is it winnable? I mean, you'd have to go in and with a meat cleaver, kill a lot of civilians. Is it winnable?
If you don't want to win, sir, you don't go to war.
Okay, but there's a way, you know, it's true, but you do the scorched earth. The Russians tried that in Afghanistan, and they lost, too, with the scorched earth.
Bill, they lost because they wanted to stay. The only mission in Afghanistan was a 15-month punitive operation to kill as many as we could and get out with the knowledge we might have to do it again.
All right. Now, Mr. O'Hanlon, you disagree with this, but the essential question tonight is, when Americans see rampaging Afghans killing 38 people because some loon in Florida burned a Koran. And we're saying we're spending billions and billions of dollars and losing thousands of American lives to protect these people? What say you?
Well, I hear you, and it's a complex thing, but I have to say, first of all, it's not fair to call this strategy just that of President Bush and President Obama. General David Petraeus and General Stanley McChrystal, two of the greatest warriors in our modern nation's history, are very integral to how we have been trying to fight this and trying not to kill huge numbers of civilians. So I have to just disagree with Dr. Scheuer on that point. It's not fair to imply that this is just a politician's decision because they don't have the stomach for the fight. People who have been in this fight longer than anyone else are the one who came up with this strategy. But I take your point. This is not a week when it's easy to defend this war, and I'm not going to excuse any of the behavior. I'll simply point to another dimension of it, which doesn't change what you've pointed out is a hugely disturbing reaction by the Afghans and by President Karzai. But I'll point out that Afghans are actually still, generally speaking, optimistic about their future, and for the most part, they don't want us to go home yet because they realize they don't yet have a strong enough army to do this job on its own. They want us to complete that process. I'm not saying that excuses anything else that has happened in the last week, but I am saying the Afghan people are a more hopeful group.
Okay. It's hard for me to quantify what percentage of the Afghan people are reasonable and what percentage are not. You know, we see these kinds of things over and over again. We know the Taliban. We know what they do. And yet the Taliban has support in that country to some extent.
Yeah, the Taliban has about 5 to 7% support in any poll I've seen. Admittedly, polling is not going to be perfect in a war zone, but the polling has shown that we have lost some support over the, George Bush had 90% popularity in Afghanistan, just like he did in the United States shortly after 9/11. Our support went down into the 30s and 40s, but 60 to 70% of Afghans still want us to stay. That's in dire contrast to Iraq.
Well, I wish they'd be a little bit more aggressive then in this kind of a thing. Dr. Scheuer, you're an expert in the region as the head of the bin Laden unit at one time for the CIA. And I say there's a Muslim problem in the world. I get a lot of heat and a lot of flack for that, as you both know. But I think there is. I don't see the good Muslims, and I absolutely think that most of the Muslim people are good. I don't see them counteracting the bad Muslims throughout the world.
The problem, Bill, is that we've never come to grips with what the war is about. We continue to tell the American people, for example, Mr. Obama, Mr. Bush, that this has to do with our culture, with our women in the workplace, with our elections. We're being attacked because of what we do in the Muslim world in terms of foreign policy. That's not to say the policy is wrong. It's simply to understand the motivation.
I know that, but in Afghanistan, we attacked them because the Taliban actively helped al-Qaeda. And the Taliban were brutal and had nothing to do with us. The way the Taliban treat women, treat any infidels, is just off the chart. It has nothing to do with the USA. They're villains.
Absolutely.
They're bad Muslims.
Bill, it's none of our business. We can't save the entire world. We have enormous problems at home. And if the Afghans want to treat their women the way they do, let them. No U.S. Marine should die so Mrs. Mohammed can vote. That's a simple bottom line, sir.
Do you think most of the Afghans are what we see in these demonstrations, Dr. Scheuer?
I think most of the Afghans dislike occupiers. That has been their tradition for 2,700 years.
I just can't get a handle on the percentage of the Muslim problem, and it's driving me crazy.